Hi, everyone. My name is Domen. I've been an Android engineer for 9 years, and I'm currently working at Lyft. Thank you for coming to this talk about feature flags. Hopefully, you will learn what feature flags are and see the benefits that they provide, and you will feel ready to get started with feature flags. So cool. So what we'll cover today is we'll cover the basics, what feature flags are. Then we'll see what the benefits and drawbacks of feature flags are and how we can use some best practices to combat the drawbacks. Next, we'll check some advanced use cases that you might encounter once you start really adopting them. And in the end, we'll take a look at how we can introduce feature flags to our app with Firebase Remote Config. So, okay, to answer the first question, what a feature flag is. To put it plainly, a feature flag is essentially a simple Boolean variable with which we can enable or disable a feature. Usually, when we say that we are putting a feature behind the feature flag, we mean that the entry point to that feature is protected by some variable or a feature flag. So this might be like a button on your screen or some other element that the user triggers to open the feature. So there's like a build time feature flag and like a runtime feature flag. So a build time would be something you have defined statically in your code or through a build system like Gradle. And to change the value of that feature flag or a variable, you need to rebuild the app, right? But what we're talking about today are runtime feature flags, so to say, which means they are controlled remotely through either an online service or your backend or some other cloud provider. And essentially, this means that you can turn on or off a feature without having to rebuild the app. Here is an example. So let's say we want to introduce a new feature to our app that enables the users to share some content from the app to some social apps like Facebook or Instagram. So the entry point to that functionality would be in the top app bar, so in the right corner. And if we place this button, this entry point, to the share functionality behind the feature flag, it means that when the feature flag is turned off, the users won't see it, even though the actual feature is still in the code, in the app. They won't be able to access it. And once we turn the feature flag on, they will see the entry point. And this is quite a simple pattern, but we'll later see why it makes it powerful. So to continue with this example, if we take a look how this would look like in code, it's essentially just an if statement. So what we have here is a function called isFeatureEnabled. The details are not that important right now. We'll take a look at how this is implemented later when we get to the Firebase part. But right now, all that is important is that this is just a regular function that returns either true or false and accepts a name of the feature flag. So here we have a feature flag called share feature enabled. And if this feature flag is turned on, then we can show the share button. If it's not, we won't show it. And you can also do more advanced things with this. So let's say you are in the process of migrating your application to Compose, and you have a really critical screen, like a home screen or some other important screen that you want to migrate from XML to Compose. And because you don't want to introduce issues or regressions, you want to verify that the new Compose screen works the same as the previous XML screen. And what you can do is you can place the Compose based version of the screen behind the feature flag. And if the feature flag is enabled, you show the new screen. If it's disabled, you show the old view-based screen. And this protects you against issues when something goes wrong. And how it does that is that if you release an important feature and you don't use a feature flag, so it means it's available for everyone through the app, and then you find some, like you did testing, everything worked fine, then the users received crashes or you got bug reports, and it's really like business critical issue. If you don't have a feature flag, you will need to create a hotfix, release it, and then wait for users to update to this version that has the bug fix. This is stressful for pretty much everyone involved, especially developers and QA. And it also means that, like, even if you do release a hotfix, the previous versions of the app that have this bug will keep crashing for users, right? And this is not good for your image or for the company bottom line. So how you can solve this is by using a feature flag. If you place a feature behind a feature flag and there's a crash, you can simply turn off the feature flag. This means that the feature won't be available anymore for the users, and that gives you time to fix it. And you can fix it at your own pace, and once you fix it, you release a new version, and you can turn on the feature flag just for the users who are on the new version that has the issue fixed. And for other users who are still on the older version, they won't see the feature. And this is really, it's one of the key functionalities and advantages of feature flag. Another one is that it allows us to decouple from the release process. And what I mean by this is, like, imagine that you're building a feature. It takes 2 weeks on Android to build. On iOS, it would take 3 weeks, and then backend would take 4 weeks. So if you're not using a feature flag, it means you have to wait until the backend is finished to release a working feature. If you're using a feature flag and the entry point is behind the feature flag that's turned off, you can release the feature after you're finished, so after 2 weeks, and then after the backend is finished, you can simply turn on the feature flag and the feature is available to the users. Of course, this assumes that everything works as it should and you've agreed on like the API contract and everything. But essentially, this also means that you have the added benefit of more users upgrading already to this version that has the feature. So once you enable it, you have more users that are exposed to it. And you can also control which users get the feature. So maybe there's a feature that's only available for specific countries or that targets specific users, and you can actually set up the feature flag so that it's only enabled for those users and disabled for everyone else. Another common thing that a lot of development teams do is use so-called feature branches. What they do is they create a branch out of the main branch and then keep merging like small functionalities of the feature into that feature branch until it's finished. And this can take like a few weeks or even a few months. And the drawback of that is that you have to keep your feature branch up to date with the main branch and also resolve any merge conflicts that arise from that. And also, if you require some core functionality of the app that's not on the feature branch, you will need to first merge it into the main branch and then merge it back into your feature branch. And this is a lot of overhead. But if you have your feature behind the feature flag, it means that it's not accessible to the users. So you can just merge smaller chunks of like tasks or features into the main branch. And even though the feature might not work yet because it's still in development and it's not finished, you can still merge it into the main branch and it's not accessible to anyone since it's behind the feature flag. And this means that you can move faster because you don't have to deal with all the overhead. And also the extra benefit is that you can discover issues early on, because while the feature flag might be disabled for production users, you can enable it on the staging and development environment. And like some other developers might detect a bug in your unfinished feature, or a QA might discover it, and so on. So this can help you release a better quality feature. One common business case is also that you might have one-time features like a marketing campaign or a holiday promotion or anything that's time sensitive. And without a feature flag, you would have to kind of target the release closest to the start date of your campaign and release it. And then after it's finished, release another version that removes that campaign or feature or promotion or whatever it is that's time sensitive. But even after you've removed it, after the promotion is done, some users might still be on older versions and are still able to access it. But if the feature, so a campaign or promotion, is under a feature flag, you can release it ahead of time. When the time comes to start the promotion, you simply enable the feature flag, and after it's finished, you disable it. And then users, even on older versions of the app, are not able to access it, and you actually don't need to like release another version of the app, right? Because everything is controlled by the feature flag. And then one also benefit, or actually a requirement, is that feature flags enable you to run A/B experiments. So we'll cover A/B experiments a little bit more later, but essentially it means you split your user group into two halves or two groups, and then they get different experiences, and then you can decide which one you want to release. So we covered a lot of benefits right now, but you're probably thinking that there are some drawbacks, right? And yeah, there are. So what you need to watch out for is overusing feature flags. So what I mean by that is, once you start using feature flags, you might think to put everything behind them just in case something goes wrong, even like a smaller features or some bug fixes or something. And while that's okay, like there's no rule against it, it adds extra complexity to the code because you have to like reason more, and it's like it complicates things, because you might also encounter situations where you have dependent feature flags, which means that one feature flag is dependent on another feature flag, kind of like a nested if statements. And what makes it hard is that this adds additional complexity to the code, because there are more code paths that you need to read and also maintain. Because suddenly you have like combinations that you need to check out, and this becomes really hard to maintain and reason about. So it's really important to be like pragmatic with what you use a feature flag for. Related to additional complexity is the increase in testing difficulty. So if you're using unit tests in your app, which you should, you will now have to add the feature flag component to your tests. This means that you will have to like write 2 tests for kind of like for every feature flag, because you want to test the case where the feature flag is disabled and also when it's enabled, right? And if you have dependent feature flags, then this also increases the number of tests that you need to write to cover every scenario. What feature flags also include is that you end up with stale feature flags, which in turn means you have tag debt. So once you release a feature and you are certain that there are no issues, you should remove the feature flag, because otherwise you just end up with code that is not read anywhere, and it's just tag debt. So what are the best practices to cover the drawbacks that we mentioned? Well, definitely put features that you think are important under feature flags and ship as early as possible. So try to avoid long-lived branches and try to just merge into the main branch once you have everything protected with a feature branch, with a feature flag. It's also a good idea to have a clear naming convention, so that it's clear from the name of the feature flag who owns it and what it represents. Because while you may have comments on your remote config, you probably don't have it in code for every feature flag, so the naming becomes really important to quickly figure out what the feature flag is guarding. Related to this is that it's a good idea to define ownership over each feature flag. So each flag should have either a team that owns it or an individual from that team, whether that's a developer or release manager or somebody else. And why that's important is because you will probably need to do regular reviews to find stale flags. So it's a good idea to make removal of feature flags a part of your kind of like a feature release checklist if you have it. And that just means that after the feature is released and everything is going without issues, you can remove the feature flag and anything that it's guarding. And as we said, also avoid dependent feature flags as they increase complexity and are hard to keep track of. Cool. So far we talked about Boolean feature flags, essentially an on-off switch. But there are also other types. So we can also use integers, strings, doubles, lists, and even JSONs. And while the regular feature flags simply turn on or off a feature, these more complex data types actually enable us to have different configurations for different users. So this means that if you take this example, if we have the number of lines for the description of the card as a feature flag of type integer, then we can remotely define how many lines the users see. So some user on the left sees one line, and then some user on the right sees 3 lines. And this helps us experiment with different values, so we can figure out what causes a better conversion rate, or in this case, like a click rate, like which users would click more on this card, the ones who see 1 line or the ones who see 3 lines. Another type are also kill switches. So these ones are similar to feature flags, but they are used for critical paths. So if in your app you have important screens like payment flows, purchase flows, you're trying to experiment with API throttling, some new compression method, key functionalities that affect either the whole app or like the most critical parts of your app, then it's a good idea to put it behind a kill switch. Because what this allows you is to turn off the feature or the functionality as soon as you change the value on your backend or remote service. So the thing with the feature flags is that usually they're refreshed like periodically, but not often. So they may be refreshed when the app launches, or in case of Firebase Remote Config, once every hour, right? And if you have a critical feature that's crashing for users, you want to turn it off as soon as possible. And kill switches are refreshed more often. And in some cases, they're also refreshed like in real time. So as soon as you change the value on your backend, it will update in the app as well. And this allows you to like disable the feature as soon as it's possible. And the good practice is also that the kill switch should be separated from the main feature flag. And as we mentioned before, so feature flags enable you to experiment with A/B testing. And what this does is you can divide the user base into multiple groups. The most simple one is like in 2 groups, and one group gets like another configuration, and the other group gets the second configuration. And then you can gather analytics and metrics that you're interested in specifically for those two groups, and you can then decide which group is performing better. And then you can decide based on the metrics whether you want to ship the new feature or not. So, for example, here we're running an A/B experiment. So one half of the users see a arrow button on the top right of the card, and the other group sees a text button. And we are interested in learning which group will click on the card more. And we can run an A/B experiment for 2 weeks, let's say. And then once we gather enough analytics and metrics, we figure out that the group with the text button is it results in more clicks, and so we decide to ship the text button, right? And you can do this kind of mini experiments to improve your conversion rate and your business metrics. And a lot of the companies are doing just this. So I don't know, if you open any major apps and you see things change for you, then they're probably running an A/B experiment. Cool. So we covered a lot of theory now, but you're probably wondering how you can get started using feature flags. So there are a couple of different options that you can start. So the most complex one is to implement your own feature management service. So this means that you have a service that runs on your own servers and that provides clients with feature flags values. The drawback here is the engineering effort required to implement all of this from scratch and also to maintain it. It's probably also not clear from the beginning what you are going to need when you start using feature flags for the first time. And it also involves a lot of not just engineering effort, but also like financial investment, right? A more lightweight solution is you can use an existing open source libraries that have the feature management and deploy them on your own servers. So you still control everything, but you don't have to implement everything from scratch. The issue here is still that you have to maintain this solution. And then the third option, which is the best probably to get started, if you're a single developer or a smaller team or company, is to use a third-party feature management service like Firebase Remote Config. So what this does is it offers everything out of the box. You don't have to deploy anything on your servers because it's hosted on the provider's servers, and it's really simple to get started. And these services usually offer also advanced features for more complex use cases. So like if you start using this and you need more functionality, they usually provide it. So yeah. So we are going to talk today about Firebase Remote Config. As we said, it's a cloud service that enables you to change the behavior and appearance of your apps. It's a third party and it offers everything out of the box. So this means that you simply sign up. Most likely you're probably already using Firebase either for Crashlytics, for push notifications, or for analytics. And it's simple to set up, and it supports all of the major clients. So it supports Android, iOS, Flutter, web, and also on the backend. And how it works, or what are the steps that you need to do, are you need to set up a Firebase project. As I said, most probably you already have it, but if not, you need to create a new project. You need to integrate the Firebase SDKs into your app. You need to configure the remote config object that the SDK provides. You need to fetch and activate values, and then read values from the remote config backend. And you also have an option to listen for updates in case you need real-time updates. So you can do all of this through the Firebase console. It's essentially just a website with all of the functionalities. And yeah, so if you don't have a Firebase project yet, you will need to create one. You go to Firebase console, and you then need to log in, and then you can create a new project, provide a name. You can enable Google Analytics as well. If you are planning on using A/B testing, then you need to actually enable it. If you're not, you can leave it disabled. And then once you've configured this, the project is ready. Next step is to add Firebase to your Android app. So on the console, you will need to input your package name and also a signing certificate if it's needed. And this will generate a Google Services .json file that you then put into your app. Next step is to add the Firebase dependencies. So first you need to add the Google Services plugin to your project level and your app level modules. After that, you will need to add the Firebase dependencies to your app level module. So you can use the Firebase bill of materials, or you can define it yourself as well. And what you will need if you want to do A/B experiments and you've enabled Google Analytics is also the Firebase Analytics dependency. And then if you want to use kind of like Kotlin extensions, you will also need to add this dependency for Firebase config, KTX. Cool. So once you have all of this set up, it means that Firebase is integrated into your app and you're ready to get started with feature flags. So on your Firebase console, on the left side in the menu, under the Build tab, you will find the Remote Config button. And if you click that, it will ask you to create your first parameter. Parameters are what Firebase calls feature flags. And what you need to do is you need to provide the name of the parameter or feature flag, and also the type of the feature flag. So in this case, we're using Boolean because we want to control the visibility of the feature. You need to provide a description and the default value. So the default value is the one that will be used like by default before you set up any user targeting. And once you have this, you click Save, and then you will have unpublished changes. To get this to your app, you will need to publish these changes. It will ask you for confirmation, and then you can publish it. And once you publish it, the feature flag will be available. Cool. So how do you read the feature flag value in your app, right? So we've created the feature flag on the Firebase console, and we set up the Firebase SDK. So the next step is to set up or configure the Firebase Remote Config instance. So I would recommend creating a class that kind of wraps the whole feature flag checking into a single class that you can then inject throughout the app. So here we've created a class called feature checker, and what it does is it retrieves the singleton Firebase Remote Config instance. It sets up the minimum fetch interval, and it sets up the settings. And what the minimum fetch interval is basically Firebase Remote Config will periodically fetch new values from backend, and you can change this value. If you're testing, so when you're developing, you can lower this value to maybe like a few minutes or something. But in production, you should use higher values, like 1 hour. Otherwise, you may experience throttling, where you will essentially get slower updates. So a good recommended value is 1 hour. So another thing that we need to set up is the default values in the app. So before the values, the feature flag values are fetched from the Firebase Remote Config, you need to have some default values in the app. And you can control the default values by providing them to the remote config object, either as a map, as we're doing here, or through the XML option. So the first time before the values are fetched, you will get whatever you set up as default. Cool. So once you have this done, you can then move on to how to fetch remote values. So there are a few options that you can use. So one is to fetch the values in a blocking way during app startup. So it means that when you open the app and maybe you're showing a splash screen or something, you can fetch the values, the latest values from Firebase in the background. And once they're done, you can then show the UI to the user. This way, the latest values are available immediately in the app. The other option that you have is you can fetch them in an asynchronous way and then update the UI as soon as the values are fetched. This means that if we go back to the initial example with the share functionality, it means that some users, when they open the app, might not see the share button, and then after a few seconds, it would show up. And then another option is also to fetch it in an async way and then use the new values the next time. So how you have to do it in your app is somewhere in your app, you need to call fetch and activate from on the remote config object. And this will fetch the values from Firebase and then activate them so they can be used in your app. And then you can read them. So here is the function that we also saw in the beginning. It's called is feature enabled. It accepts the feature flag name, and then it calls get boolean function on the remote config object, and that returns either true or false based on whatever is set on the remote config console. And then there are also other functions that provide different types. So this is how you would fetch a long value. And once you have these features, these functions, you can use them in your app. So here we have a view model. We've injected the feature checker class that we created. And on the initialization of the view model, we are launching a coroutine to check whether a feature is enabled. And then we are posting those updates to the UI through the state flow. And then on the UI side, so in Compose, you would collect the state flow as state and then do something like this if check in your composable. If the button is enabled, show it, otherwise hide it. And this way, you can change the visibility of the arrow button in the right corner of the card. Cool. So yeah, another use case that we talked about before with kill switches is you may want to observe updates in real time. Maybe it's critical that the changes are reflected immediately and the 1 hour refresh isn't working for you. So Firebase actually supports that. You can receive new values as soon as they are published. And what Firebase does is it opens an HTTP connection to the remote config backend. It keeps it open, and then it posts or sends the updates as soon as they happen. So instead of doing the pull method, you have a push method, essentially. And how you do this in code is, so Firebase Remote Config object has a add-on config update listener function, which is essentially a callback. And once the values are updated on the console, you will receive this callback. What you then have to do is you need to activate the new values, and then you can use them. So in this function here, we are essentially converting the callback-based approach that Firebase provides to the Kotlin Flow approach. So in your code, you can then call this function as a regular flow. You can filter out only the value that you're interested in. So in this case, we're only interested when the details screen enabled feature flag updates. And once it updates, we collect the value and we submit it to the UI in the same way we did before. And how this essentially means is, so on the left, we can see a card and the button in the top right corner is not visible. Then we publish changes on the Firebase console. And as soon as they are published, the app is automatically updated and the button becomes visible. Cool. Yeah, so Firebase also supports conditions, which are essentially filters with which you can target specific devices, app versions, users, and so on. So you can define a new condition, like here you can, here we're just targeting Android. This makes sense if we also had iOS or other platforms. And then you can use that condition in the feature flag settings. So here we have the parameter or feature flag from before, and we've added this condition that the detail screen is only enabled for Android. For all of the other platforms that also use this feature flag, it will be disabled. And in this way, you can like release a feature on Android before it's done on iOS. You can do more with conditions. So you can also target like a random percentage of users, essentially meaning that you have a phased rollout. It also supports what we talked about before, which is one-time features or like promotions. So in this case, it's possible to have a Halloween promotion that starts at like end of October and ends at the beginning of November. And you can then use this condition to define when the value of the feature flag is enabled. And this will all be done automatically. So if you set a condition like this, once the end date is passed, the feature will be disabled automatically. So Firebase provides also some other capabilities. One of them is the A/B experiments, which we talked about before. It can only be used with Google Analytics because you need to have specifics for each user, like user ID and other things. And you can set up experiments and like divide your users into different groups and decide like what the trigger is for the users to enter the experiment. Another quite advanced use case that Firebase provides is personalization. They essentially use machine learning to deliver a custom experience to each user. And it essentially enables you to automatically achieve the maximum conversion. So it will change the settings of the experiment, or essentially the settings or like the config, so it achieves maximum conversion rate. And this is really useful when you're showing ads, or if you have a game and you need to adjust difficulty of the game based on how users are doing. Cool. So yeah, but Firebase is free to use, but there are also some limitations. So you can have unlimited daily active users, but the limitations come from how many feature flags you can have. So the limit is currently at 2000 parameters, meaning you can have at most 2000 feature flags. There are some limitations to the names of the parameters, so they can only be up to 256 characters long. And you can have a maximum of 500 conditions. And yeah, so I talked about this before, but essentially if you're refreshing or requesting updates too often, you will get throttled, and then you will have to wait for a longer time to get the new values. And another limitation is also that you can have maximum of 300 total A/B experiments, and at most 24 of them can actually be active. And these are limitations, but if you're starting out, it's very unlikely that you will hit this. And if you do hit these limitations, then you can start considering some other alternative, like have a self-hosted service or find other providers. Cool. So to summarize, feature flags are a really powerful tool to have in your arsenal. They help you protect against issues. They can enable you to move faster and release features faster. And also, they enable you to kind of move faster and be safer. And there are some drawbacks, but the benefits far outweigh the drawbacks, in my opinion. And if you follow the best practices that we outlined, you will also negate some of the drawbacks. And it's really easy to get started with feature flags if you use Firebase Remote Config. Most likely you're already using Firebase, so this is essentially really easy to set up. And it means that there's really low engineering effort required to get all the benefits of feature flags. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new.
Awesome. Thank you, Domen. It was great. And I definitely enjoyed it. And I guess just attendees also got some new information, and we have some question here. And some of them you covered some of them already, but ask it. The one question is here is that what is the recommendation for sharing a feature flag between classes and files? Should we wrap all of them? And as I understand it correctly, you suggested to have a wrapper class top of the R feature flags and use that one. Do you want to add anything top of that?
No, I think you covered it. So I would recommend you have a wrapper class. That's kind of a generic feature checker that you can then inject throughout your code base as kind of a way to check different feature flags. And I'm not sure if the question is hinting at that, but like if you have, I don't know, maybe a feature that's split through different modules or different classes, it's okay to use a feature flag in these cases. So I don't know, you might have a deep link to a feature, and there's also a button on the UI to enter the feature. So it's okay to have both entry points protected with a feature flag. I hope
see.
that answers the
I see.
question.
I hope to. The next question is that you recommended to wrap any new feature will increase the complexity. I guess the question is this: should we wrap our every new features in under a feature flag or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, like it might seem like a good idea, right, to wrap any feature behind the feature flag because it's safer, essentially. Like you have a way to roll it back. But I would say to be pragmatic and decide whether like a feature is worth it. Because as we said, it increases the complexity slightly, and if you don't remove the feature flag, you will also end up with tech debt. So I would say it depends on the feature.
True, true. The next question we have is about the correct place to using the feature flag. Should we use it in UI layer or data layer?
That's another great question. So I would recommend to uh, use it in like to fetch it in the data layer and then submit the value to the or observe the value in the view layer. So essentially that means that if you're using compose and the visibility of a button is behind the feature flag, you in the compose you observe state flow that's exposed in the view model, and then the view model fetches the value of the feature flag.
I see. I see the common pattern to observe the repository layer and get the data and always use single source of truth as that.
Yeah, because it also enables you to then test it easier, right? Because it's easier to test the data layers than it is to test the view layers.
Exactly. In test environment, instead of just sending requests to Firebase, you can just mark the data and use that.
Yeah.
Perfect. So the next question is that it is necessary if feature that already set as true for long time should be deleted because there is no purpose for the feature already set. I guess the question is that how we can find the dead feature flag and after a long time development.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, if like a feature flag is set to true for a long time, you can remove the feature flag. And how you can find this is I mentioned that it's a good idea to have an owner for every feature flag, and maybe that person is responsible. Or if you have like a release checklist, to add it as the last item. So maybe after a few weeks, um, after a successful release and there are no issues, you can remove the flag.
I see. I see. Do you use any tool for finding that one, or is it just based on the contract with product managers or release manager?
Yeah, you can also have tools that kind of connect with the feature management service that you're using and check like when the value was last updated, and if it's above a certain threshold, then it will like tell you that you can remove the feature flag.
Yeah, correct. The next question is from my side. And should we set a feature flag on client side or should we set it on backend side as well?
Well, it depends, I guess, on the feature, but usually if you have like if you have an entry point into a feature that's maybe a button or something else that's visible to the user, then I would suggest have it on the client side. But I've also seen cases where you have it both on backend and client. And again, it depends, right? You can have it on both, it's extra protection. So yeah, it kind of depends, I guess.
I got it.
Sorry, it's a bit of a non-answer, but yeah, it depends.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Domen. It was a great talk and I definitely enjoyed it.
Thank
And
you.
thank
Yes.
you for everyone.
Thanks, everyone.